for the hobby.
Welcome to the For the Hobby podcast. My name is Jordan Hagedorn, and this is episode 8. On this episode, we are joined by an absolute legend, and if not the legend of the hobby, somebody I've become great friends with, had great respect for since I discovered him at 9 years old, Dr. James Beckett. Welcome to the podcast.
I had no idea you were the one that discovered me, Jordan. That's news to me, but I'm so happy you did.
Yeah, well, I, along with a lot of young kids, discovered your magazine and your price guide back in the 80s and 90s, and it's an absolute honor to have you on the podcast. We become friendly, and we've been on each other's podcasts in the past, and I'm extremely grateful for your generosity with your time and your knowledge, and not just with me, but in the hobby. So I just want to thank you first and foremost.
I'm having a blast, and you make it fun, Jordan. Thanks.
You bet. So let's start with your origin story. I know you've told it a million times. For those listening, I'd like to educate the younger consumers. Bless you. I'd like to educate the younger kids and the people who are coming into the hobby. So if you could just give us a little bit of an origin story and a backstory on how you got started in the hobby.
Well, I mean, I'm 7 years old, and our family was doing a vacation. I guess we only had 4 kids at the time. I was the oldest and we wound up having another sister a couple years after that. But driving down the road, and we pulled over to get gas, and I think it's my dad, went in, and there was a penny pack of 56 tops, and he bought one for me. So I opened it up. It was Spook Jacobs. It could have been Willie Mays, could have been Mickey Mantle, it could have been Duke Snyder, it could have been Yogi Berra, it could have been Roy Campanella, all those great guys in the second series of 56 tops. But no, it was Spook Jacobs. So I still have the card, and didn't do much in 56 because I was first grader. But yeah, you're learning to read, you're learning math, and I was on grade or better, I'm sure. But a lot of fun. The neighborhood kids collected, and so the next 5 years or so started getting pretty heavy. Everybody collected in the neighborhood. I didn't have very much money, so I was buying. If I bought a pack, I was trading the gum for more cards. Should have kept the wrappers, but had a decent collection, but not the biggest collection in my neighborhood. Um, but I loved it. I loved the sport. I was playing. My mom would not let me play with my cards unless it was raining. It was raining. Otherwise, we had to go outside and play the real sports. You're not going to do cards unless it's raining. I suppose if it was a blizzard, we could stay in and do cards then too.
So from there, you continue to collect. And when did it get serious? I think there's all a moment for us as collectors where it goes from, yeah, we're playing around as kids to, you know what, this is something that I'm really putting some energy into. And as an adult, will then maybe do more collecting.
It kicked in more in grad school. In grad school, I think I really needed a hobby. It was very intense, very, very challenging. And it wasn't that it was challenging in terms of so many hours. It's just those intense hours. I mean, you're in grad school, and it's theoretical, statistical kind of stuff. And so it's an hour lecture, but it's like you need to decompress. Undergraduate wasn't like that, but grad school was like that. And so I thought, well, let's collect. My dad used to collect stamps. Maybe I'll collect stamps. So I bought some stamps. No, it didn't do it for me. But I had cards, and I had my dad's cards, and they were at my parents' house. So when I got them, I thought, hey, these are pretty cool. Connected with a guy that was here in the community. We became great friends, and he was a kind of an advanced collector, and we became fast friends. So, and I was in the right place at the right time. Very blessed, Jordan. It was wonderful. It's been a great ride, and it continues.
Sure. So on that note, can you talk about that? The hobby being a form of escapism and kind of a safe place to go and a getaway from that chaos you had, in school. But can you talk about that and kind of the importance of that?
Well, I mean, it's a different kind of escape than going snow skiing. When you go snow skiing, you're going down the mountain, and you don't want to crash into a tree and have an injury. You've got to pay attention. You can't think about your troubles because you're concentrating on enjoying going down the mountain. Well, in card collecting, there are no trees that you're going to crash into, and so you can be in the other world of collecting. Um, but you can, hopefully, it's addiction if you're not able to put it down. If you can put it down and say, hey, it's time to do something else, I'll get back to it. That's a healthy hobby. And so I feel like it was like that. Now, what got out of hand for me is when the business grew so much, kind of like things are now. When it was growing so much, it was some pretty insane hours at the peak.
Sure. So can you
But
talk about on the business side of things, you started, in my opinion, the most iconic endeavor in the history of the hobby, essentially, where you became a price guide for all brands, all athletes, all sports, essentially, and became the Bible, as a lot of people say, in the hobby for us kids and card shops to determine the values of cards. We now see things like Card Ladder, where they're revolutionizing the way people are measuring their cards, how they're collecting, how they're pursuing cards, how they're tracking their cards. So you were, you know, a pioneer and you created this endeavor. And I know you've talked a lot about the history of that, but can you give me just a brief overview of how you started that and then how you determined the prices and really just how that kind of grew into you, having this empire at some point?
well, to tie all that together is that each person, it's kind of the problem with evaluating baseball and football and basketball stars from different eras. You're embedded into the technology and the era that you're born into. And so I had technology that allowed me to do certain things, but the card ladder guys have additional technology. But again, if I'd have been 5 years older or started 5 years earlier, there would have been it'd have been way more difficult without personal computers and the computing power that was available to me. So hopefully I was trying to take advantage of the computer power, the personal computer power that was available. Now, what you can do on a phone, on a mobile, on an iPad is pretty amazing. So, we did the best we could with what we had. As I've said, tried to make it as much as possible empirically based. And you've seen that, card ladders doing that, but they're better able to take at least the data on the star players, the high demand cards. Our challenge was we were doing every card in every set. That's pretty
Unbelievable.
mind-boggling.
So that is mind boggling. And you tackled something that I don't think anyone had the guts to do. So props to you on that. And then it
They
evolved.
said it couldn't be done. So that was just the inflammatory statement that got me going.
I like that. Sometimes it takes a little bit of doubt from other people.
Well,
So
I didn't have doubt. I didn't have doubt, but other people had doubt, and that's again, if I would have had a little bit of doubt, Jordan, then it would have that would have been debilitating because I would have thought about it. Wow, but no, I thought, here's how long it's going to take me. I can do this.
sure. Well, you're a professor of statistics, so that'll help. You just knew the time. So, and you put in a lot of hours. So, I'm a 90s kid. We've talked a lot about that. As you know, I'm a Brett Favre super collector, love Griffey and Jordan and all those guys. So, Michael Jordan was on the first cover of basketball, the basketball Beckett. Can you talk about some of your favorite athletes from the 90s? I know it's like choosing a kid, but some of you always had a superstar association and a positive tone. We've talked about that a lot. Can you talk about who some of your favorite athletes were, some of your favorite covers, kind of the groundbreaking nature of some of those? I just would love to have some insight into your world back in the 80s and 90s.
Well, the insight, I'm different from you. So my insight is it isn't you're coming at it like a fan, and I had to sanitize my fandom a little bit because whatever I loved about the cover in February, in March there was a new month, and so you couldn't, what have you done lately? So we're having to pick covers all the time, and I tried to encourage my team to not get too fixated on, to try to be democratic, I guess. If we'd have been headquartered in Wisconsin, we can't lean too heavily toward the pack and Favre. And so we're trying, and we're here in Dallas for, we couldn't be Cowboys all the time, or people would say, this is a regional, you're biased. And so we tried very hard not to pick our favorites, but try to cover what people wanted. And I think we did a good job of that, but it meant, you know, people not always being able to choose their favorite player.
Sure. And so
Dave
did you,
Lipka would have Walter Payton, so it's just that you can do that every once in a while, but not all the time.
sure. Did you meet a lot of these athletes, or was it more just kind of creating the content around them?
More creating the content around him. I think if I look at who met the most athletes, I have employees, teammates that did an awful lot of that.
Sure.
I was in the years I was doing a price guide and running a company and being a, husband, father, and responsible citizen, being involved and having friends and stuff. It was a too full of a life, too full.
Sure.
Such a thing is too full. I
Well,
got it. It was, yeah, I did everything I had to do, but I didn't get to do very much stuff I really wanted to do that wasn't essential.
sure.
And that was
Well,
for a period of 10 years, maybe 12
okay.
years.
Well, I had the pleasure to sit with Michael Jordan and for 45 minutes, and I sat and I talked to him about his sneakers. And it was pretty surreal to sit and talk to one of my favorite athletes and maybe the most famous human ever about his sneakers. And I mention that because you always know it's a privilege for me to sit and talk to you and hear insight into some of these really interesting things. And I'm wondering if you could tell me about this.
Well, that's the very first cover. And I did, Denny got that designed. It's actually the tougher, there are two covers of the first price guide. That's the first annual price guide. That's the first one that we self-published. And then after that, we had publishers contact us, and we made a deal with a publishing company, and they had the brown cover, which actually was the second cover, and it was the more populous, more mass produced cover. And
Sure.
after that, but that white cover was pretty basic, but it got us off the. We sold out the very first day.
Sure. Well, and for those listening and not watching, this is the 1979 Sport Americana Baseball Card Price Guide. And this is before Beckett magazine, Beckett Price Guide came out, essentially. I just think it's so interesting to think about how far the hobby has come and the industry has come. In 1979, I was negative 6 years old. However, the love that has come from the hobby, you laid the foundation and really were a trailblazer in the hobby. And I've recognized you as an incredible leader, as a man and a husband and not even a boss, as a leader. I don't look at you as a boss. I think there's a difference between a boss and a leader. And everybody I've talked to has never had anything bad to say about you. And um, I really appreciate that about you. And I'm curious if you could share some insight into your leadership, whether it's principles or how you approached it. You talk a lot about integrity and just being a hard worker, but wondering if you can share with the audience here, as a lot of us in the hobby are looking to create. I'm starting a card shop. I have a podcast. A lot of people are doing, making moves, so to speak, in the hobby. We'd love to carry on your legacy and carry on your principles and kind of your path. So if you can share any of those things, I would love to hear any insight.
Well, I may have said this, but my personality is not such that I'm an inspirer, but I think I do inspiring things. And so if you watch what I do, people might be inspired by that, but they're not going to be inspired by me, other than, so I think I'm trying to put out an inspiring work product, which is kind of not a nice way to say I did these price guides, but again, Jordan, they fully blossomed when I started bringing in these outstanding teammates. I mean, I worked really hard, and those first price guides that were mostly me, or essentially me, were great works. But it really took off when I brought in some talented teammates.
Sure. But you also,
And some of them were more inspiring and marketing things like that. I just wanted to be, really wanted to be accurate. I wanted to be timely, because you can have a great personality, but if you're making a lot of mistakes, then I wanted to be trustworthy. There's two aspects of being trustworthy. If you say somebody's trustworthy, one is a a competency, and the other is like character. In other words, if I trust you, if I fully trust you, that means if you're trusting a brain surgeon, you need to trust their competency more than their character. If you're trusting somebody, if you say, hey, you know what, I've gotta, can you hold my wallet for an hour while I go over here? You want somebody, you're going to trust them. There's no competency required. It's a character thing. So ideally, the trust of somebody is based on character and competency. And so I try to stay in my lane. So I'm not, no one is competent in everything. And probably character is also can be a minefield for some people. Some people have things that are weaknesses. Well, I'm going to try to surround myself with people that are going to help me to with any competencies that I don't have, or any weaknesses that would be character things that would be temptations for me. I don't
Sure.
think I have any horrible ones, but um, so I think doing life is a team sport. If you go through it in an isolated way, you're headed for trouble. It's better to have friends around you that are supporting you and got your back. And I've
Sure.
had
So,
that. I've always been blessed with great friends.
so Dr. Beckett's three C's: character, competency, and consistency. How about that?
That works. It's yeah,
That
sure.
seems to be you've talked a lot about that. So speaking of consistency, one of my favorite athletes ever, Brett Favre, my favorite athlete, was pretty consistent, was on the field every game, broke the streak, broke the record, made it fun. You are all about making the hobby fun. You're doing hobby dinners, you're staying involved. You have a lot of us younger guys coming in, the next wave, inspiring us, helping us, giving us a voice, being on our podcast. Can you talk about your decision to come back in and share your knowledge, share your information, and support us?
Well, I got a choice. I can either like keep a secret, keep all these secret things I've learned and take them to my grave, or I can do a daily podcast and share some stories and some insights. And insights probably is the right word. And meeting virtually or in person with people like you, draw out insights. And so that's been a lot of fun. So why would I want to keep it to myself when I think this is the greatest hobby of all time? And it's just not good to be idle. It's not good to be. So what I stumbled into, Jordan, and you're a good example of this, is that um, I had a mass-produced publication that really affected kind of the whole hobby. It seemed like we had a very dominant market share. Well, there's lots of podcasts out there. There's lots of YouTubers. There's lots of card shows. I can't be everywhere. I have no desire to have employees. But what I can do with a simple podcast and doing some of these events, like you mentioned, I can influence the influencers. And most of them are younger than me, and they are inspiring to me. They're inspiring in their own right. So if I can give you or anybody else some insight that's helpful to you, and if I give you 10 insights and five of them you think they're stupid, but five of them you think, hey, that's great, take the five that are good. So yeah, I want to influence the influencers, and you're an influencer, so I'm delighted to spend time with you, and looking forward to seeing what great things you're going to do.
Sure. And I appreciate that. I know it's a really tight knit hobby, and it's really fun to know that all of us kind of have each other's back, and we want to grow the hobby. We want everybody to have a good experience. Nobody comes into this saying they're going to try to ruin somebody's day. So I really have appreciated that positive tone with you. I will ask you, I'm curious, you have become a muse for a lot of us, right? Something to look up to and be inspired by. You talked about your work ethic in the past. You talked about that was just kind of how you were raised. Can you talk about who you've been inspired by, who some of your muses have been, where you've pulled that inspiration from, and those good five insights you talked about? Where did you pull those from over the years?
Well, my dad for sure, my mom too. They're both really hard workers, and high integrity and all that. So they're still around. They're 95, be 96 in the fall. Slowing down, but you're supposed to slow down when you're in your 90s. So they're inspiring to me. And I've had some mentors. I've never really had a desire to have a single mentor, but I've always wanted to have multiple mentors. When I turned 40, I made a list of 7 men who were, for the most part, older than me. More, the average was kind of like old enough to be my older brother, not necessarily old enough to be my dad, although a couple of them were. Uh, and I just wanted to, I didn't know them all, but I just made a list, and they didn't all live in Dallas. And over the course of the next couple of years, I met with all of them and became great friends with a few of them. And a couple of them didn't connect as much, but all of them were gracious with their time. And I realized there's a general generational transfer of knowledge that's a two-way street. I mean, they drew energy from me back in those days, and I certainly drew energy and wisdom from them. They had been places that I thought I was going, and they were very generous with their time. And so for me to do a little bit of that with people like you, it's pay it back and pay it forward.
Sure. Well, and it probably is invigorating to you as well. You've met a lot of guys. You get your hobby dinner, and we're all giving each other energy, and it doesn't matter age, race, whatever it is, we all love the hobby, and we're all trying to uplift each other. And I got to give you credit for that. You've really done a great job curating awesome people around the hobby, just in your inner circle. I'm sure over many years, but in the time I've known you, a short couple of years, whatever you're doing has a different energy, and that comes from a place of love and gratitude and generosity. And so I have to thank you for that. And I know you get sick of the compliments, but I have to thank you for
I mean,
that.
I'll accept that I curated a group in the sense of bringing them together, but I didn't curate the person. These are amazing guys, and you've met many of them in the industry, and I've worked with some of them, and they're outstanding. And so all I'm doing is inviting some of these outstanding people to come in the room and enjoy each other and the fellowship of this hobby we all love. So I'm not taking credit for who they are. I'll take credit for the evening by bringing them together. We all had a great time, and you were
But
there.
however, you got to know that those people get invited to a lot of things, and it takes a lot to get them away from their family and up off the couch after working pretty hard. So for you to have that amount of respect for people, I mean, I flew down from Wisconsin to be a part of it, and you had people from all over the nation, that were showing respect to you and then paying that forward to the room. So it really is something that is rare. I want you to know that. I think you know that, but I almost think you're too close to take the full credit. It really is a beautiful thing in the hobby. And I just can't thank you enough for not just me, but on behalf of everyone who's a part of those things. I know I've had private conversations of how grateful they are. And I just don't think we can ever articulate how thankful we are for you doing that. So I want to go on the record and be
Okay.
very clear about that.
Yeah, you are definitely, because I think of, the way we come at things, but you're definitely a celebrator, and I'm not that much of a celebrator. It's, from all those years of doing the price guide, you do one, and then what you got to start on the next one. And so in my family of origin, I don't think we celebrated that much. It was, hey, you finished fifth grade. That's great. Hey, get ready for sixth grade. So as a little kid. So yeah. So I mean, but it doesn't feel like a chore. It feels like you're growing, you're active, you're involved, you're energized, and you don't want an overwhelming challenge, but you want a challenge that gets your interest. And so I've got a challenge to put out a podcast every day. It's not so onerous that I'm dreading it. I'm looking forward to it. Something I can do. I get to meet with interesting people like you and hear the stories, and it cues up stories in me that I thought I forgot about that. So
Sure.
it's fun.
So yeah, I agree. And I guess that is for me in being a celebrator is I like to have fun. I like to share stories and share experiences with people. Oftentimes, to a place where people are like, okay, I get it. You're thankful and this and that. And so I'll ask you this, I'm about to embark on a challenge myself, and I know you like to challenge yourself and others. I am starting a local card shop, and it's going to be a massive undertaking. It's going to be hard. It's going to be a lot of hours, but I look at it as a privilege. I'm very excited to serve the community and serve the hobby, and find the 10 and 12-year-old me that come in with their dad and they're excited. So I know at one point you had a card shop. You've been into hundreds of card shops. You are friends with a lot of owners of card shops. I'm wondering, do you have any insights into how I should approach starting the card shop? We talked about it briefly on one of your episodes, but do you have any tips or tricks or thoughts or ideas or insights into my local card shop as I embark on it?
Well, the only thing I would say is that, we had partners, Gervis and Wayne were my partners in that, and we were not drastically different, but nobody would confuse us for being triplets or anything. But for you, I'm very analytical. And so, um, that had value in the card shop, but that's one side of the coin. The people aspect that you have is uh, is a critical aspect of making the shop fun, and that's going to happen. And I don't know if your wife is going to be, your bookkeeper or your how do you do or anything or what the dynamic is there. But it's just sometimes there's a yin and a yang from the left brain and the right brain that 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 is done through business partners or an employee that's very detail oriented and can keeping all the records and all that stuff. Because I mean, I don't, maybe you like doing that stuff too, but most people that are very very personable are they're cheerleaders and they love it. But then that so there's so I don't know what your team is configured with. Let's put it that way. Like I
Yep.
said, I hired to my weaknesses, and nobody gets all the strengths. And I wind up, and when you're hiring to your weaknesses, you want them to be the stronger, the better. If I were hiring clones of myself, I'd want them to be a little bit worse than me so I could be the top dog. Well, I'm not hiring clones of me. I'm hiring people who are going to add. And so maybe that's something for you that to think about. If you've got an employee that's just wants to sort cards or do some of the stuff that you don't want to do because you need to be out there pressing the flesh.
Sure. Yep. That's great insight. I would say, do you have any tactical? I mean, those are big picture for sure things we're working toward. What are the two must have for a card shop? Is it the dollar box? Is it the, you
Well,
know,
no, no,
the-
no, it's the entrepreneur. The entrepreneur has to be nimble. And so whatever you think going in, you need to have be prepared to pivot or to adjust. And you may need somebody to come in and give you some perspective after you've done it for 3 months. These other card shops could, if you're willing to share your how you're doing. I mean, I'd get input from and insights from other people that are doing card shops. There's a Facebook group for card shops. I'd get, if I were you, I'd get thick into that
sure.
just because it's territorially not competitive. I mean, there are going to be two shops there. If somebody that's in another state, they can give you all their tips and vice versa, and it's no skin off anybody's back. And
Sure.
so yeah, I would. I mean, you're so relational, Jordan. I would, but be ready to pivot. Be ready to be nimble. Not have showcases you can move around, and you're going to have a seating area or a pizza area, and if that doesn't work, you're going to reconfigure it into a breaking area or a so just don't be in cement.
Sure.
Be prepared to be nimble because and don't say I'm never going to bring in apparel or hats or because you can't say never. Or
Sure.
Pokemon. I don't know if you're going to bring in non-sport stuff, but be nimble, be
Sure.
prepared to adjust.
Sounds good. Great advice. So speaking of adjusting and being nimble, we've had a shift in grading companies recently. It's been unbelievable. And I love your episode about grading. Like I was so obsessed. I probably listened to that episode 10 times. And you bring such an analytical perspective to grading. how subjective it is, but how you can have 100 different graders and they grade it differently. And there's just a lot of statistical analysis that you gave to grading. Somebody we're friendly with, Nat Turner, has bought PSA, Collectors Universe, but PSA with a group of guys, including the owner of the Mets and some other guys. And he's already made some changes. They shut down. They've done some other things. They're kind of bringing different levels back. I'm curious of your take specifically to start with Nat Turner. Nat Turner is in my opinion, the biggest basketball collector on the planet. He has a massive collection. He loves cards more than almost anybody I know. He's showing that with his actions, and he's kind of taking some things on in the hobby. Sold his company a few years ago for $2.1 billion, could sit back and hang out, but is putting his money where his mouth is and is coming into the hobby doing some really special things. So being a pioneer yourself and somebody who to me is kind of the godfather of the hobby, I would love your take on Nat Turner, some of the moves he's making and the impact that he's having on the hobby.
I'm bullish. I mean, I would, PSA is certainly the volume leader in grading, and BGS, I guess, got a late start, but with the registry and all that, we've not caught up on the volume aspect. They have more cards out there, but BGS is strong in its own right, and Nat Turner knows that. But one thing I like several things. Number one, his collector perspective is invaluable. If we couldn't ask for a better owner that has deep enough pockets to do the right thing and has a longer term horizon that's not public to where you got to do something this quarter. So I'm very bullish on the fact that he's a collector and he's savvy and he's in it for the long term. That's great. Yeah, if he's done some, like Rich would say, we did an episode about this, about how he hasn't, he's jumped in, but not without a sense of purpose of making very decisive judgments, that were unprecedented in the history of the hobby, to come in and stop submissions, for example, and a pretty significant price increase, right after he paid a world record price, way above what people would say that, other than people in the industry, everybody would think he overpaid. So my hat's off to him. I mean, I think he's going to be a breath of fresh air for our industry, and he's not tried to do it himself. He's brought in other partners with deep pockets, which again he's just done. Heretofore, he seems like he's done an awful lot of things right.
Sure.
Hats off.
One, and he's got that it factor. He really is a very smart guy and he loves cards. That's a huge part. Like you said, he's not only a collector, he just loves cards, right? There's collectors I know that they collect cards, but they don't love cards. This dude loves cards more than anybody I've ever seen. It's apparent. I mean, otherwise you wouldn't spend the time and money and time away from your family and things in order to build this. I'm very curious, would love to have him on the podcast and talk to him more about it. So, I started this podcast called For the Hobby. The card shop will be the For the Hobby Sports Card Shop. You are good for the hobby. You always have been. You've been an advocate for the hobby. I'm curious, we've talked about if we were the commissioner and things like that. So you got Nat Turner, you got yourself, you have a lot of these guys. I consider myself a big advocate for the hobby. Can you talk about some of the good things in the hobby, what you hope for as in your retirement and as you get older, and you can sit back and reflect a lot on your impact on the hobby, but also the state of it and then the future of it? Curious if you could share any insights on just where you hope and wish the hobby continues to go. And as I become 70 in my 70s, what are your hopes and dreams and wishes for the hobby?
Well, it's got my name on it, Jordan. So I mean, I want it to do well. My former company. So that's a strong loyalty there. But I mean, you can't think of the company's not going to do very well unless the hobby's doing well. So I never worried about, I just wanted to, I didn't have any numerical goals. It was just, I want to be going in the right direction. I'm doing the right stuff, and then let the chips fall where they may. And I hope Nat Turner has that same approach. It seems like he does. Doesn't seem like he has extreme pressure on him, on or his partners to financially have a windfall immediately. They paid a lot of money, but it's a business that could continue to grow. They want to grow it. So yeah. So I think my legacy is rides with the hobby, for the hobby. I mean, if the hobby does well, then I'm going to be somebody that people say, hey, he was helpful in during this period of time in putting the hobby on the map. And then take it and other people take it and run with it. But if the hobby peaks and then fizzles a little bit, and the main way that can happen is if prices just get so overheated that people get discouraged
Sure.
and just quit in disgust. And so as long as there's some level of integrity, and that's why grading is important, that there'd be integrity, and people would be, you can't tell people to have restraint, because all that means is, and you mentioned Nat, it's like everybody else should have restraint so I can get the good cards. So you can't, it just doesn't work. Um, so people are always going to be wanting the great cards, and what they pay is relative to what they think is a good deal.
Sure.
So the price guide era, we're now pretty much beyond the printed price guide era. It's instant pricing and kind of theoretical pricing. If this goes for this, then this ought to go for that.
Sure. Yeah,
And
and you're right. You're absolutely right. There's a relativity that comes with it. As the hobby rose, we thought certain cards were a better deal just because the hobby was so hot. My last episode, I had Gene and Earl of Arena Design, and I want to talk about the impact they had. And you've witnessed everything in the hobby, from great designs to brands, card brands coming and going, all these things. So I have these cards, as you know, Brett is my guy, and all these PMGs and all the rubies and all these like higher end cards, they design those. So I would love your take on just the beauty of cards. 90s, you talked on one of your episodes about 96, 97, 98, those years. Can you just touch on those real quick? You lived through that. Had the price guide, and you had a front row seat to some of the most beautiful cards. I see in the background there's a green PMG of Barry Sanders. Can you just touch on those, the beauty of those designs, and kind of what those meant to the hobby?
well, that was an unprecedented time, in the hobby, and they weren't fully. It's not that they weren't appreciated back in the day. It's just that they were so rarely seen. We maybe, we'd get a sample of some of the stuff, but they were what, one per case, some of these things. And so, but they were doing a lot of cases, but they're really hard to get these hits. And so that is the golden age of card design, and thanks to the arenas. So thanks for having them on and letting them tell their story. But if you look back at those episodes, we should have been going gaga over the scarcity and the beauty of those cards, but we weren't, because they weren't in the mainstream conversation because they were too rare. Because if it was so great, how come Fleer went and Skybox and they went out of business? They went out of business because their business model didn't work. And you think, well, how could that be when they're putting out all these beautiful cards? Well, they weren't all these beautiful cards. They were too rare, so they were never sold. It made it so difficult for us on the price guide front, because we tried to do a multiple, but the trading and selling and buying was so sparse.
Sure. And do you think
And it
we'll
was
never
name your
see?
price, but it would be outrageous to name a price in those days. That would have been, even thousands of dollars would have been perceived as being outrageous, much less tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands, or now millions, or at
Sure.
least hundreds of thousands.
And the Jordan Green would go for over 1 million now at this
Yeah,
point. So
yeah.
do you think we'll never see anything like that again?
And we're seeing it now. It's just that it's now more contrived, with serial numbers that are, one of ones, one of fives, things like that, and these combo patch kind of things with interesting configurations. So they're marketing to it, whereas in those days it was more stealth marketing. It was beyond aspirational. It was Willy Wonka. It was the golden ticket, and yet it was so unlikely that you'd get it that you weren't going to buy up packs to try to get one in those days. Now people would buy a case in hopes of getting any PMG red, much less green,
Yeah.
any card. And
Yeah.
if it's basketball, you couldn't. It would be hard to afford, even though it's very unlikely. You might not even get one.
If you could have one card ever, what would it be? One card.
Oh, you can't just have one card.
If you could only have one card,
I'm
well,
a
maybe a card you don't have.
well. I don't know. I mean, I don't think of it that way, Jordan. I don't because if I didn't have it, then I would try to get it. I'd love to have a Wagner, and that'd be the only card. But even if I had it, it's pretty expensive. If you don't,
Sure.
that in
True.
any condition. And so, the chances I had to get one back in the old days, that ship has sailed.
Sure.
So that'd be the one card I'd want to have, and I'm unwilling to pay for it.
Okay. Sounds good. Well, I'll end with this. I'll give you my final words. I just want to thank you once again for being on the podcast. Thank you for being so gracious with your time, your energy, your insight, your wisdom. I want to tell you this. I will give you my word that I will carry on your legacy in the hobby. And I know I'm not the only one. I know a lot of people have a lot of love and respect for what you've done, and you've paved the way for us to come behind you and build our own legacies in the hobby and do things that follow in your footsteps. So I want to thank you. I want to let you know we will continue to honor your legacy and your work. And we humbly thank you for everything you've done for the hobby and continue to do for the hobby as we all embark on the next chapter of our collecting journeys.
Well, thanks, Jordan. I mean, like I said, I'm a pay it forward guy, and I love paying it forward to guys that going to carry that banner with enthusiasm, which you certainly are. So keep up the good work. And again, I've enjoyed being on this with you.
Thank you, Jim. And thank you all for listening to the For the Hobby podcast. We'll catch you next time.